Asian Network.
It's 10:30 and we are taking over the live lounge for a very special show with a delicious audience.
They are delicious. It's all part of the Big British Asian Summer, and we want to find out more about our identity, religion, relationship and politics as British Asians. So all the light stuff, right, Mobeen? We commissioned polling company Comres to gather the thoughts of 2,000 British Asians, and the survey covered a range of topics that affect our everyday lives, and we've been unpicking the results.
We have. So tonight's show, we're taking a look at what it means to be British Asian and asking, who do we think we are? We're in the world famous live lounge and we've got a live audience here with us. They're going to make a bit of noise. And we want you to get involved as well. The most important thing is actually to have a conversation in this room, but if you're watching or listening at home as well.
So the questions we're asking: as British Asians, how should we define ourselves? Are conservative community values making young Asians unhappy? And does the future look bright for British Asians in the UK? As Mobeen says, we want to hear your opinions and experiences. It doesn't matter if you agree or not. We want to hear from you, and you can ring up and have a rant if you want. It's fine. Get in touch by text on 81869 or tweet us at BBC Asian Network using the hashtag British Asian.
Before we get started, I need to just do a little bit of housekeeping. It's not about toilets or bathrooms. It's about the fact that you might hear language that might offend you. This is a late night show. If you're likely to be offended, please log on to our website and listen to something else. But I do hope you will stay with us. I really do. So let's get started. Let's talk about identity. Take a listen to this.
I identify myself as British. My parents from Bangladesh, but I haven't been to Bangladesh. But although it's part of my culture, I don't think it forms part of my identity fully.
I identify as British first. I don't really think that Asian is something I'd identify as. I'd always go as British first. I think others who see me might identify me through my race, but for me it's more British, and Asian is just a part of who I am, but it doesn't define me.
If people ask me what my identity is, the first thing I would probably put before everything else is I would say that I'm Scottish. Then I would say that I'm Asian, and then, or even more particular, I would say I'm Punjabi Sikh.
I would say I'm a strong, independent, self-willed woman who is trying to live life on my own terms outside of some of the restrictions that I feel like society has placed on me ever since I was a child.
I do describe myself as British Asian, even though I'm mixed race. My mum's white, because I don't feel like a white person. I don't feel like I'm mixed race. I just think I'm Asian. And I don't really say that I'm Gujarati or Hindu or Indian or any of that.
Off the cuff, normally I would identify myself as a British Asian, but to be completely honest with you, if I was to sit there and think about it, I would identify myself as a British Indian, which is slightly more granular in terms of my description, because Asian is such a massive demographic of people. You could be from China and be Asian. British Asian and then British Indian is where I would go next. What's really sort of unique about that is the fact that I feel very English, but I would never describe myself as English.
So listen to this. I want to give you some numbers, juicy numbers here. The Comres poll asked, what is most important in how you think about yourself? Religion, ethnicity, or nationality? So 36% of British Asians stated religion is the first thing. 36% say religion is the first thing. 73% of British Asians said religion was important to them, and the number's even higher when it comes to their families, with 86% of them saying it's really important to their families. Indy, I want to go to you. Indy, tell us about yourself.
So for me, I think the first thing when people look at me, they think this dude is Sikh. So that's because I've got a turban and beard. So when I first walk in a room, when anyone sees me, whether I like it or not, they say, oh, that dude's Sikh. If they don't know about my faith, then they'll ask me about it. Why have you got a turban and beard? For me, I think I would definitely identify myself as British Asian. British because that's where I was born, and Asian because, well, I'm from a Punjabi background, and the Punjab area spanned across India and Pakistan. So I wouldn't say British Indian or British Pakistani. I would go wider and say British Asian, because that whole region is where my ancestors were from, basically.
So how important is the Sikh thing?
Sikh thing is important to me, but all three of those are really important. It depends on the scenario. I'll use it to my advantage. If someone's asking me about if I'm at a British-centred event, then I'm British. If I'm at a Sikh event, I'm Sikh. If I'm at a wider Asian event like here, I'm Asian.
I was going to ask you, does it depend on who asks you? So if someone white says to you, where are you from? Or if someone if I asked you where are you from, would your answer depend on that?
Definitely. I think that's because my persona, my background, I'm multifaceted. So it's like a chameleon in a sense. You can use what you need to your advantage at the time it's needed. So it depends on the context I'm asked. I'll use that. I wouldn't put myself in one linear bucket. Say, well, I'm British first, or I'm Asian first, or I'm Sikh first. Depending upon who asks me, I'll give them the answer that they would want or what might benefit me. If I'm being really honest.
Yeah, completely. Do you? I want to bring in Pale. Can we hear what you got to say? I know you've got an interesting phrase that you use about pan-Desi identity.
Oh gosh,
Yeah.
I don't know if this is on.
We can hear you, yeah.
You can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Pan-Desi. I think I like to say that because obviously with what I do, for those of you who don't know me, I work very closely to the British Gujarati community, make a lot of noise for them. But as I've done that, it's sort of turned into that's the only thing I am. And it's been not difficult, but it's been interesting for me to then connect with an Asian audience and to talk about being Asian as well. Because obviously I've had experiences with just being Asian as well, isn't it? So I feel that I use Pan-Asian because it kind of shows that I'm not just Gujarati and I'm inclusive of many other things. But as I've gone further in this journey, I use the word East African British Gujarati as well, because as I've traveled around the world, I've realized that being East African and Gujarati or East African Asian has its own sort of uniqueness as well. So
Were you born in Britain?
I was, yes.
Would you ever just say I'm British?
Yes, a lot of the times. If I've done like shows overseas in America, for example, I would say that I'm British and then go on to say that I'm South Asian. Because there, of course, Asian means Southeast Asian more than it means South Asian. So just like Indy said, it depends where I am, who I'm speaking to. But yeah, it's always changing and adapting.
Yeah, I want to bring in ICJ in a second, but I want to know who thinks religion is super important in their identity, or who can explain why so many people in the survey said religion was a really, why it was a primary force. We're going to go to ICJ and then I'll come to you, yeah?
Hey, what is the question?
So why did so many people say religion's the top thing for them? Why is it a priority?
Because I think when a lot of our grandparents came over, it's the one thing that they can connect back to where they came from. A lot of them came to help Britain recover after the wars. So I guess it's their way of, because I know for my grandparents and my grandma especially, it's my grandma's been here I think about 60 years, still can't speak a word of English, but that helps her connect back to Pakistan. That helps her feel like she's taken something away from there, because she can't go back. She's old now, so she can't go back. It's not as easy as it is for her now. So I think it's an issue about connecting back to her real identity, where she came from. Because out here, like the survey shows, like a lot of British people don't necessarily care about religion at all, in comparatively to Asian people.
Yeah, I wanted to go to you in the black top, and then Harris over there. There you go. You got Mike next to you. Yeah.
I would say religion is of significant importance, because I think a lot of people live their life based on their religious values and teachings, and that also has a huge impact on your upbringing as well. So, for example, I was born and brought up in a Hindu family, so a lot of my lifestyle is like based on the Hindu teachings, such as like following a vegetarian lifestyle and abstaining from eating meat and drinking alcohol.
Is it important for you to be seen that way, though? Is it important for you to kind of wear that on your sleeve?
Yeah, I think it is part of my identity, and it does shape the person who I am today.
Yeah, Harris, why do you think it's so crucial?
Just again to like touch on what you said, I think it's more, religion is like a foundation for you. So it's more like it is your identity. So it's the values and like the morals and just kind of like the family and the ethics of religion. It kind of gives you that identity. So your family give you it. It's what you've known from when you're born. And then I think that kind of influences how you are as a person in society and how you choose to make your decisions. Because like for me growing up, my parents were never orthodox. Religion was never pushed or forced upon me. It was always taught for me to understand and acknowledge, rather than to just kind of run away from or not want to like. I've got a lot of friends that were always told to be religious, or there was always this kind of stigma attached to religion. So I think it it's important to understand that I think religion is your foundation as a person, because that is what you kind of wear, you know, as a mask every day. So
Can I ask the audience, how religious are you? Like, be honest.
We've got one
Come
hand
on.
from, yeah.
That's so interesting. No, okay, we've got how many hands? What does that mean? Well, I'm interested. People say they're religious, right? Or my religion matters. I want to know how much it matters. Do you follow it in to the T? Yeah.
It's a personal thing. Religion is
Into the mic, please. Go,
Yeah,
yeah,
go.
Harris.
Religion's
Do you pick and
personal.
choose what you want? What
No,
you
not at
follow?
all. It's like, I think it's what you take from it as a person, because you're always growing. Like, you're always a work in progress. So you can never like categorize yourself as how religious you are, because it's an ongoing journey.
I'm interested as well. Mehek, I'll bring you in a second, but I'm interested. Meg, maybe you've got an opinion on this. How important is being identified as part of a particular religious group? Is that more important than actually being the legit 100% practicing version of that religion? And if so, why, Mehek?
I would agree with you. I think my experience is a little bit different because I'm a Jain, so it's a minority religion, and the rules are really hard to follow because if you're really religious, you can't have root vegetables on top of being vegetarian, and you have to really think about every single impact you're having in the world. So I would say, for me, yeah, I mean, I feel like it's less questionable. For example, you can, with identity, you're not sure if you're British, you're not sure if you're Indian, you're not sure really where you're from, but with your religion you can say I'm Muslim, and it's more solid. I hope that makes sense. Yeah.
It entirely makes sense. I think, you know, we're living in a time as well, aren't we, where lots of people will identify by a particular religion because that religion is zeitgeisty, or it feels like it might be, you know, it's mentioned in the media and it's discussed and so forth. Does anyone think their religious practice or their religious identity has shifted with what's in the news? Go on. Yeah. Is it? You just nodded. Let's get a mic. Go on. Yeah, please.
I don't publicly talk about my religion for my own personal reasons, but for certain, yeah, I think whenever I see anything to do with my faith in the media, I feel like a real like doof, like this thud in my stomach, and I feel sick. I feel physically sick because I'm just like, oh my God, what's the backlash going to be? How's it going to affect my friends? Is it going to affect me? What about my friends who visibly look like they come from my faith? So there's always that concern in the back of my head, and I know for several people I know from my religious background, it's literally safer to be invisible than to openly say, this is me, this is where I come from. And I feel many of them do feel like it's fueled by the narratives we see in various media outlets.
So would you hide that part of your identity?
I don't talk about it. It's personal. And as Harris said, it's a journey, and I'm still very much on that journey as a person. And I think in time when I'm ready to talk about it, I will have that conversation, but I have to make sure that I'm in a space where I can personally and spiritually like talk about it with nuance, of course.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to Millie in Birmingham.
Hi, hello.
Hey, Millie, how you doing? What do you make of what you're hearing?
Well, I've got a few ideas as to identity, how it applies to me, and what I think can define as what identity is. I think the two most significant parts of identity, in my opinion, is the nationality and religion that you follow. So,
nationality and religion?
Yes, so in my personal experience, I'm Brit Asian on paper, but in mentality it's sort of hard to come to terms with both. It's quite hard to adjust. I feel as if there's many clashes in the cultures. So Pakistani culture means to me family values, traditions, and value of community in the family, which is somewhat of a crossover with Islam, but as people say, that culture and Islam are sort of entwined with each other. Hospitality, marriage rituals, forbiddance of alcohol are all things that I think are the most significant parts of the Pakistani culture for me. But living in a Asian community, the white culture is sort of rubbed off onto me as well. For example, ideas in music, literature, movies, even food, for example, full English breakfast.
Full English breakfast?
Yes, but I would have the full of it. I would have the bits I could eat.
Okay.
The national sport, which is football, this sort of all the things that, in my opinion, kind of define what white culture is. But as a young woman, I felt as if in my adolescent years in particular, I was trying to fit the mould of my white friends. And even though I say the word white, it's kind of strange in a sense, because white isn't really British at all, if you think about it, because there are influences from many multiple countries, for example, New Zealand, Australia, India, Canada, and many more. So it's kind of hard to trace back British. And that's part of me as well, part of me with my Pakistani roots.
It's interesting what you're saying, because one of the other things that came out of the survey, which we found fascinating, me and Mobeen, was about toning down identity, wasn't it? So it found, the survey, that quite a lot of British Asians, more than half, 53%, have toned down their Asian identity or changed their behaviour in order to fit in. And that's 12% do it frequently. So I'm curious to know, we're still with our guests over in Birmingham. We've got Priyanka and Saba, if you're with us as well. Priyanka, if I can ask you, have you ever toned down your identity?
Never felt like I've had to tone down my identity, and I think that's maybe because I live in Bradford, which is such a multicultural city, and therefore it's been quite natural for me to just express myself how I am.
Has anyone here had to tone it down? Okay, let me...
Super Joshi.
Super Joshi. What have you done?
He's
Give
not
us some
just
examples.
Joshi, Super Joshi. Yeah, go for it.
You called yourself Super.
Yes, I suppose if we start with my name. When I first started out as an artist, I didn't use an Asian name because I thought that was just not appropriate. In
Why?
the end, I thought, forget it, and I used my real surname.
Why did you think it wasn't appropriate?
You don't want to be seen as an Asian artist, I guess, or you don't. It won't fit. The face won't fit, basically.
What was your name? Your artist
I
name?
was Nuclear, then I was Madin, and I had DJ So Fresh. I've had so many. In the end, I
So
kind of...
it wasn't John or Paul, was it? They weren't like classically English names.
Well, I chose the name Madin, for example, because it's actually a Sanskrit word meaning intoxicated. But I got fed up of people asking me, "What are you?" And I thought Madin is a name. A Muslim hears it, they think it's one of them. Hindus think it's one of them, and Sikhs, they won't be sure, but they might think it's one of them.
How do you feel about doing that? Like, you okay with it, or do you think,
No,
you know
for-
what, I had to do that?
For me, religion, well, it wasn't even what I was going to talk about, but while we're on it, so I don't identify as my religion, if that makes sense, primarily because as I've grown older and read about it, my religion, it turns out, is more of a British construct than a Desi one. I use the word Desi more than anything else. And the other thing is that so I'm kind of strange in a respect because I'm what is known as Hindu Punjabi, which is a bizarre mixture. Because if I'm hanging around with Pale, I will get some of the things he says, but some of it we will be alien to each other. It's one of those things. But I've had then Sikhs friends saying, "Oh, but you're Gujarati." It's like, well, no, not really. And then they would get embarrassed because my Punjabi is better than theirs. so that happens as well. So you have this kind of bizarre thing where in your kind of linguistic group you're the minority, but if they look at the kind of the macro environment, you're the majority, and that's quite a bizarre thing. Also, when people ask me, "Where are you from?" I say London, even though I have lived outside of London in the UK, but I just say I'm from London. And I think, especially when traveling around Europe, that kind of it kind of covers everything, and people think actually
People know where London is. People
yeah,
know,
yeah, completely. And the other thing I found that going, I also used European a lot more than British, because I think having travelled around Europe a lot, both professionally and kind of personally, there's a lot more that I feel at home in Zurich or in anywhere in Germany or anywhere else. And what's got me around Europe the most is actually my knowledge of Punjabi and Hindi, because I'll meet a Pakistani or an Indian taxi driver or whoever at the airport or in the shop, and I need to know that much better than I know Spanish, for example, and that always gets me by.
We've got this lady at the front that we are going to go to you.
Go for it.
Because we know you've had your hand up. Go
Sure.
on. Tell us your name.
My name is Jaspreet, and just coming back to what we're talking about in terms of identity and toning down our identity, I remember there was a time in my life when I would introduce myself to people, especially in the workspace, and rather than saying Jaspreet, which I find is an easy name to pronounce, I would cut it down and just say my name's Jazz, just to make it easier for them. And over time I realised that by doing that, we're essentially halving who we are. I'm literally halving my name and belittling my identity and what my name means and who I am and where I come from. And then also as a teacher, I'm a history teacher by day, I realised that it's so important that I pronounce my names of my students correctly. So at the start of every year, I make sure each of them tell me how to pronounce their names, because that makes such a huge impact on their confidence and their ability and their attainment. There was this research done by an academic called Rita Coley from the University of California, and she did like a long-term piece of research on looking at students whose names were pronounced incorrectly, and that was kids of different ethnic backgrounds, compared to the kids from there whose names were easily pronounced, and the impact that had on their attainment over a long period of time and the impact that had on their aspirations over a long period of time. So I think we should own our names and make sure people pronounce them correctly, because it makes a huge difference.
Thank you so much. Can I bring in Sabah Jalal, the journalist, all the way from Leeds?
Yes, hello.
Sabah, how are you doing? What do you
I'm
make
good,
of this?
thank you. Yeah, first and foremost, I see myself as British, but obviously, a part of me is Asian Pakistani. That's who I am. In terms of religion, it doesn't mean that, you have to be one or the other. You have to either be Asian Pakistani Muslim or you have to be British. You can identify as a religious person and also be British. It kind of merges into one. It doesn't have to be like a separate thing. You don't have to, put one over the other. So for example, like our own castes from our ancestors say, we were in separate castes, particularly in India, but that doesn't hinder us anymore. So that shouldn't have to mean that we have to define ourselves now. We have the best of both worlds, really.
Yeah, I completely see that. Is there anyone here that really does see caste as relevant anymore? Go on, be honest, because I know this is a really prickly, spiky subject. Go on, say what. Introduce yourself and tell me what you
My name's
think.
Calbia Baines. I actually found, because we had a conversation about this earlier, that people look at you like when you would, I don't know, when you're on the dating scene, people would come up to you and go, sorry, like, start a conversation with you, ask you your surname, and then even ask you like what background you are and what caste, and you'll be like, and that went on when I was at uni, and then you were saying it goes on right now as well. So I was quite surprised to hear that. So I think when people are coming up to you to find out what your surname is and your background, it's quite, for me, I
What
think
do you say to them?
I actually have laughed at people and I've just walked away from that conversation, because I personally think that if you're that shallow, I'm not going to continue a conversation like that. Take the time to have conversation, get to know someone. But I found it when I was at university. There was a girl come up to me, and actually she came up to me and went, oh, like, what caste are you? Because if she wanted to be a friend with me, I had to be a particular caste to fit in with her group.
To be your friend.
Yeah. So for me, that was like,
Not even
no, I
get
don't
married.
think so. I literally...
Do you know,
It was like
I'd love it if people are listening to this to get in touch, right?
Yeah,
are you one of
absolutely.
those people that has done that? Have you when you're dating someone, wanted to know what their background is? Get in touch. Our text number is 81869. We want to hear from the no.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can we go to Pale as well? Thank you.
I just say I'm from Gryffindor. If they ask my caste, I just like really interesting that. Sorry, I want to go back to what Jaspreet had to say, and about what you just said about pronunciation and how we should use our full name and the rest of that. But when we do that, are we actually pronouncing it correctly? Because you just said that your name, you said that you called yourself Jazz before, and then you went down to Jaspreet, and then you mentioned Rita Coley, but her name would be Rita Coley, wouldn't it? Right. So this is my biggest issue, right? So when I've worked in the media and whatever, and when I switch between two languages, I would always get mistreated if I came across too Asian, or if I did anything that was like, why is he so outrageously correct in the way he's speaking Hindi or Gujarati? See, I said Gujarati because it's not Gujarati. And I think it's interesting because isn't there a little bit of a hypocrisy when we say that you have to pronounce it right, but we're the ones who often tell one another that he's overdoing it or he's underdoing it.
I could just feel the energy in the room has just shifted. Everyone's
I thought I'd add some
feeling a bit
spice to the
uncomfortable.
conversation. I'm not saying you do it because I do it as well. Like when I'm presenting, I'll say Patel instead of Patel because it's obviously what's correct in the room. Is that
Chirag,
right?
can you respond to that?
More
and
hands
then
are rising. This is nice.
Go on. Go on.
I can respond, but it's going to be very embarrassing because about the mispronouncing names. When I was younger, I went to a mostly white boarding school growing up, so I got to the point where I would say my name was Chirag, but no one knew what that was like. So I said, oh, it's like Chirac, the French president. And then the teachers would say, oh, it's Chirag. And after a point, I honestly thought my name was pronounced Chirag for a long period of time. Then when I go back to India, like, it's not Chirag, it's Chirag. Get your name right. And I'm sorry, Mum. And then I'd go back, I'd forget, and then it just became a whole thing. Like, I honestly, for a long period of time, I would get my name wrong because I would hear my name wrong at the time. I was a very dumb kid, okay? I'm not much better now, but I was a very dumb kid. Don't hold it against me.
Listen, my name's Nomia, but when I was growing up, I would say just call me Nom, because I got people calling me Nomi, Naomi. I've had Nokia, other brands available, obviously. Yeah. But yeah. So I think we've all had the name experience, haven't we?
I didn't know this was going to turn into a counselling session.
I know, let's all counsel each other. Let me just quickly read. I've got loads of messages. This one on Facebook from Misbah. I'm proud of my heritage, but being born and bred in Britain, I'm British. So why do I have to identify myself further than just British? Why do I have to say I'm British Asian? Why can't I just say I'm British? So just in case you've just joined us, you're listening to Being British Asian. Who do we think we are on BBC Asian Network? I'm Nomia and Mobeen is with me. We're both finding out what young British Asians think about identity, religion, relationships and politics. So next up, let's talk about social attitudes. This Comres poll suggests that British Asians hold more socially conservative attitudes compared to the population as a whole when it comes to relationships. Have a listen.
It's okay if you're white, it's okay if you're black, as long as you're in love with each other, you can communicate with each other, you have the understanding.
Someone told her, you're going out with a white girl. Someone said you had been seen being all divana with a Gori in London.
It's not true. Obviously, I'm not with a Gori or anybody. I'm not with anyone, Auntie.
I understand that you can't help who you fall in love with, and I myself would be a little bit shocked if you were with a non-Indian guy. You know, there's cultural differences. How would you overcome all of that?
I thought it was stereotypical. I thought that's what people see on TV. That's not now. This day and age, if you're with whoever, or if you're with an English person, you just tell, and it's not a problem.
Would you try and convince her to like boys?
No.
You wouldn't try and convince her?
No. If it's God's wish.
God's wish.
This goes to show she's quite tolerant then, isn't she?
A bit modern.
You talk about 10 or 15 years ago, the society and the family members were not familiar with it. Somebody even never knew about what is gay and what is lesbian, you know.
No, good. That's bad. Because no, any religion allow that.
We don't put that one on the table. It's off our table.
Did you hear that? Of course we don't. So listen to this, right? So the Comres poll found that 34% of British Asians would be offended if a family member was having sex before marriage. Yeah, that's a good chunk of those people. 36% said same-sex relationships are not acceptable. And generally, British Asians are less open to family members having relationships with people from different ethnic and religious groups.
Got this really interesting text to 81869 from Rebecca. I'm British, Indian, Bengali, modern, with a lesbian daughter and a gay son, married Bengali cousin. So I believe live your life in truth and happiness. He that dwells in love dwells in God. She had an arranged marriage and divorced afterwards. And it's interesting because she's 48 and she's saying, you know, I'm modern. And I'd be curious to know what the audience, what your families are like.
Yeah, absolutely.
When it comes to this.
Absolutely. I want to ask this question now, so I want you to all think about this. Do you feel conservative community values are making young British Asians unhappy? Is it screwing us up? Darren, can I bring you in, please? Darren, jump up and grab a mic.
Hi, yeah. So when I looked at the survey, what really shocked me was that the differentiation between, on the question about sex outside of marriage, people from an older group tend to think that's more acceptable than a younger group. And that for me is super shocking, because the thing is, if as Asians, if we alienate one another and each, ourselves for doing things like having sex outside of marriage, for being gay, for dating whoever we want, we're just screwing ourselves up. All we're just doing is we're just disintegrating. So I don't understand why we've moved forward in so many different things, but when it comes to things like loving who you want, having sex whenever you want, why that should still be such a big deal.
Is that because we care what family thinks?
I don't even think it's family, because I mean, for some people it is. For me, not really, because I have a very open and close relationship with my mother. I'm very fortunate in that sense. But for me, I think it's not even family. It's not even the elder generation. I think we're so busy pointing fingers at one another. Like, I've been on Mobeen's show before, and I've said previously, I will happily talk about dating with maybe a handful of extremely close friends that I have that are British Asian, but other friends most likely no. I would rather have a frank conversation about sex with one of my best friends who's white than I would with maybe perhaps somebody that I've known for about 20 years, because I just feel like there would be a sense of judgment there. So I think that's really shocking. I think we're doing ourselves a disservice.
Do you think it's a loaded word? Do you think we're moving backwards?
I don't see what's changed. I don't see what's changed from being younger and, knowing, oh my God, if I have a boyfriend, I'm going to have to hide this, I'm going to have to lie about this. I don't see how that has changed now. I have younger cousins, I have a younger sibling as well, and it's still very much the same, and I don't understand why it is. I don't understand why we can't just be cool with the fact that let's just date whoever we want, let's just have sex whenever we want. I don't understand why it's such a big deal.
Thank you, Darren. Should we go to Sherry? Where's Sherry? Hey, Sherry, what you got to say? You're from Brunel Hindu Society, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right.
Go on.
Well, personally, I'm not for or against sex before marriage, but personally, it's not something that appeals to me, mainly because of my upbringing. But I would never discriminate and hate on someone who was open to that.
Would you ever judge anyone? And I use that word judge because it's something I think we all do about whatever in a silent way. Would you ever look?
Maybe not
judge?
openly, but I think on the back of my head, I might not judge, but I would just question like the loyalty in their relationship.
The loyalty. So unpack that for me.
Like, I feel like you never really know what's going on in someone's relationship.
Yeah.
You can never really judge.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for your honesty. I appreciate that. Have you got your hand up? Maitri.
You're not sure. I wasn't too sure if I want to talk about this, but let's go for it. Hi. So I'm British, Sri Lankan, and Buddhist. And I remember, like, when I was younger, the last thing I'd want to talk to my mum about is sex. And I would never mention it. I would never talk about my nights out or, like, dating anyone or anything like that. And then the older I got, I just realised, like, why am I so scared to talk to, like, my mum about it? Like, she's the one that should love me the most and, like, be there for me. And I just remember telling her, like, Mum, like, I don't know why we can't talk about this, frankly. And I just said to her, like, and I knew what her opinions were about it, like, earlier. And I knew that for her, sex before marriage, especially for a girl, is wrong. And I just said, like, I just don't see why that's okay for me and, like, not okay. That's not okay for me, and it's okay for my brother.
What do you mean? Was it okay for your brother to?
Oh, so one day this is a funny story actually. My dad dropped him off at his girlfriend's house, and my dad thought he was going to get back in the car, and then he didn't. And then my dad's like, "What are they doing?" And I was like, "Well, you know, Dad." And he was like, "Huh?" And then I was like, "Yeah, you know, making babies." And then that was just too much for him. So then I told my mum, and she just started laughing. And he came home like 5 days later, and so then basically I just said to my mum, like, what do you think they're doing? And she's just like, at least as long as you're wearing a condom, huh? And then I was just like, okay, wait, sorry, how could you just say that to my brother and you would never say that to me? And I just kind of lost my head about that. And then gradually, like, through university in like the last 3 years, it's become like such an open conversation, and she just wants, you know, but we talk about it the right way, and we talk about relationships and getting to know someone and, like, you know, doing something out of love and stuff like that. So
is that now a comfortable conversation?
It's like 75, 25.
So it's quite progress.
So it's 100%. We made a lot of progress. Like, yeah, I'm really happy that she's.
Can I ask a provocative question? Am I allowed to do this?
Of course you are.
I'm so struck by what you were saying about the difference between women and men, and I think you're right about that. I'd love to know from the men in the audience, do you judge a woman who's had sex before marriage? Come on.
Okay, I just want to jump in because everyone kind of either looked at the ground or just shook their heads. And I think this goes back, just before we bring you in, I think this goes back to, the stat was, yet 34% of British Asians would be offended if family members are having sex before marriage. I wonder if part of that is bullshit. I wonder if people are just saying that because they think that is the responsible thing to say. Go for it. Please introduce yourself.
It depends on the mentality of the person. So for some people, they'll say, no, it's none of my business. And personally, I think that's the right thing to say. But others will say, others will completely judge based on stuff like that. And it's a shame for some people.
So you wouldn't judge a girl?
No, I can't judge someone because I don't know them. That's the thing. It's not my life.
Yeah.
I shouldn't judge someone based on their actions. It's not a bad action. Not really a bad action.
Would you be offended if a family member was having sex before marriage?
Would I be offended? It's not, like I said, it's not my business. I can't, maybe if it was a sibling, maybe. It's, like I said, not my business. I can't personally get involved in their own lives like that.
So you wouldn't really say anything to them?
I'd want to be direct and open about it. I wouldn't want to hide it from them.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to say, like, I wouldn't want to enforce my values upon someone else.
Can I find a man, maybe there isn't one here, who would force their values onto someone? Oh, okay. Harris,
go for it, Harris.
You're going to bring a bit of controversy.
I've got something to say about, so the conversation, sorry, I forgot your name. What was your name? Okay, Mike Free, whatever. So, like, what you said about...
You got her name wrong.
What? I asked your name. What is your name?
Maitri. Yeah,
Maitri. Okay. So, just on that discussion that you said about having with your mum and being open, and that progression and the fact that, you felt as though your brother got away with it and you didn't, and, like, in the whole 19 years of my life, or the 20 years of my life, I've never actually had... a conversation with my parents about sexual intercourse or about a relationship or, about being with someone. So I think the issue is not, that it's a boy or a girl, because I can't have an open conversation with my parents about sexual intercourse because I'd probably get slapped, If you said, are you sleeping with someone, she'd be completely disappointed, do you know what I mean? So I don't think it has anything to do... I think there is a lot of, issues around a female or respect issues, but I think it's equally the same. I think Asian parents...
Do you really think it's the same?
Yeah, most definitely.
Dilushka, can we bring you in?
Most definitely.
Thank you, Harris. Thanks for that.
Hi. No, it's just going on that. I think the really odd thing about Asian culture is what you were saying about, not speaking to your parents about sex or relationships. That was my life up until I turned about 23. And then it was, so when are you getting married? When are you getting in a relationship? And I had gone my whole life with my mum, putting me off relationships, study, education comes first. Boys, should do everything to stop me from being in contact with the opposite sex. Wasn't allowed to do sleepovers at girls' houses or anything, just to stop me from doing that. But now... it seems to be the topic of conversation with
when you're getting married.
When you're getting married, with absolutely everyone, with her friends, with aunties, with uncles. It's suddenly become everyone's business, when before it was something that was so taboo and not spoken about, and being in a relationship was just, absolutely shocking. And now it's the hot topic.
Thank you. I just want to bring this back to the core thing and then I'll bring you in. But the core question is, if we are as a community, or if a sizable proportion of our community is saying, I am offended by members of my family having sex before marriage, it's wrong. I take it why that's so offended. And same-sex relationships are wrong. Aren't those views out of sync with the rest of society? And then isn't that holding us back as a community? Go for it, and then we'll go to Sharon.
I'm actually married and divorced. So when I was getting married, I remember both me and my partner decided to get intimate, and the family found out after we got married. So there was that whole thing again, that you're a girl and he's a guy, it's okay for him to do it, but the shame you've brought on us. And I was a bit surprised with that. So there's double standards in the South Asian community with women and men, even though you're getting intimate with your partner who you're marrying. Also, I found the standards changed once I became a divorcee, where like all of a sudden I wasn't allowed to date out a race. I remember every time my mum was introducing me to anyone, he had to be a Punjabi guy, and then all of a sudden I'm okay to bring a white guy home now. And it's like, you can get with anyone because now you're seen as a divorcee. So the standards change depending on your status, I feel personally.
And maybe when you get older as well, and you've not met anyone, they're like, look, just marry
You're
anyone.
Off the benchmark.
Anyone will do now.
Yeah. So there's all that as well.
Yeah, Sharon, can we go to you?
I think it's really important to kind of contextualize it. So for me, I always I think it's very easy to think of like, oh, Asian culture is very backwards. And when you're talking to people from different backgrounds, you kind of do get people say those things to you like, oh, well, your parents can arrange your marriage and all those kinds of questions. And I don't agree with it. But what I do always say is like, my grandparents left India in 1930, and like the 1930s and the culture they're trying to maintain is that. And every time I've been back to India, like I went backpacking on my own there recently, and like the culture has changed, like not everywhere, but in the cities, for example, like a lot of people are very sexually liberal, and there is conversations about that, and that kind of relationships and sex before marriage is something that is spoken about. So I think you have to put it in that context of like, we're a diasporic kind of community, and we're trying to maintain those values that, you know, our grandparents or further brought with them. Whether
Sure.
that's, yeah.
But is that then holding us back? I know I'm asking for your judgment here.
No pressure.
Yeah.
I know you don't want to
think
do
it's-
it, but go on, just go for it.
I mean, I think it's just, again, like, you don't want to paint everyone with that brush of like, oh, all British Asians are backwards. I just think it's one of those things where you have to try and take it out of that context of like, we as British Asians responded like that, and it is in each individual case. Some people feel like they want to maintain that, and you know, that's why some people may have responded with those views, and some people feel like they don't.
We've got this on the BBC Asian Network Facebook page. We are streaming live, so do get your comments into us. Mariam has a message saying, feeling judged by your own community, and when you see that these standards just don't apply when they watch TV or partake in certain activities. I wonder what those activities are.
Sexy time activities.
Sexy time. The hypocrisy is infuriating. That's Mariam's viewpoint on there.
I think you had your hand up, didn't you? Yeah, just introduce yourself again.
Sure, my name is Chaya, but I think we forget that the Kama Sutra comes from South Asia, you know, and I think a lot of us forget that, you know, it is a part of overall South Asian heritage before colonisation, so it's always worth remembering that it's a part of the collective subcontinent heritage.
Brilliant. I want to go to Parlay and then to Super Joshi.
You say holding us back, but I see my community as quite successful, so I'm trying to understand, what do you mean by holding us back?
When you say my community?
Yes. So right now I'm speaking as a British Gujarati. I think we're quite a successful community. Yeah, we've got a lot of issues as well.
But when you say holding back, I mean, yes, you can be very successful, you can have lots of money, you can have a nice car, but I think it's about attitudes, it's about mentality, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about, really.
Yeah, absolutely. But even moving away from like the money side of things, I think as a Gujarati, that's East African, I think what Shireen was saying, that with the 1930s, same with my grandparents, it was the same sort of period. So we have a lot of values that we've held on from that. So I think part of the reasons we've held on to these things is because as migrants, we've had other things to deal with rather than addressing like this second wave of issues. But I think moving forward, speaking to Sherry, is it? So she is from Brunel Hindu Society, you said? Yep. So that's where I started a lot of my stuff on Hinduism. I was a learning coordinator there as well. And just speaking today, we can see such a difference from when I used to host talks on sexuality or alcohol in Hinduism compared to now. So there is progress, but I think you need to dig deeper to see that progress.
You do. Is there an element, though, and Super Joshi, I'll bring you in a second, is there an element, though, of calling out this stuff? Because I hear what you're saying, but I think there's an element in there of you saying we need to understand why it's happening and therefore you can't confront it. There's another view, and that would be you have to call this shit out. You have to say it's not acceptable to treat men and women differently. It's not acceptable to condemn people for having sex before marriage. It's not acceptable to be homophobic. Do you think we need to call it out more?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, just before I pass the mic on, a lot of this comes down to media and sociology literacy in the Asian community. A lot of people haven't actually seen that this is actually something sociological that requires our input. So I think that's part of the reason.
Can I bring in Super Joshi and then Mehak? Is that okay?
Right, there's so many questions now. I've forgotten which ones you answered.
So is it holding us back?
Okay,
yeah.
Well, firstly, the gay thing. I hear a lot of particularly Asians saying, I'm not okay with it. It's like as if your opinion matters. Like, the sheer arrogance of that. I mean, do you know what I mean?
But I guess it does if their son or daughter is, right?
You've got no choice then, really. At the end of the day, I think people are now getting to realise that it is something that is innate. It's not something that develops. It's not something you can cure. Again, also with the Kama Sutra point, I mean, I'd like to say that I tried to remind people that it came from India. It was not.
I thought you were going to say something else then, Super Joshi. I was wondering where you were going with that one.
Super in many ways.
Basically, it didn't get me any success trying to remind people that. But having said that...
It's got an image of you just going around reminding people of the Kama Sutra
completely.
in your own little way.
So my... It's a T-shirt, yeah.
Enough.
So I found my grandfather, his attitudes have, seem to be more liberal than my father's. And I think that happens. But at the same time...
Why?
I think he's just like... It's okay, you know. Everything's he kind of sees how the world is going, and my dad maybe is just trying to hold on to something.
Just to interject, it's so interesting. Just mentioning what your granddad there. There was a survey out recently looking at looking at Indian people's attitudes in India, and they found that on the whole, Indian people are more liberal. You know, that there is this almost like people back home in India and Pakistan are a little bit more liberal than Asians here.
Yeah, completely. And I think you see that in most walks of life. I think that point's already been mentioned. I think a lot of people that, like you said, with regards to giving these kind of conservative opinions, maybe it's what they feel they should be saying, or maybe they're just not getting any and they're just jealous. That's also a real possibility. Having said that, and having been through the whole don't talk about girls and then getting married and it's like, where's the baby at? It's like as if I suddenly know how it works. I do understand why you're held off from dating, and I think it's actually based on kind of the Hindu way of looking at things, and I think that's culturally seeped into South Asian. But generally, up to a certain point, you should be focusing on your studies, and after that is the time for you to get married and then have kids, and then the next stage is to have kids, and the final stage is retire, meditate, and then die having meditated enough to go.
It's like life is linear, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's no room for any kind of spontaneity or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's assuming you don't do a master's after having a kid, because that kind of ruins the whole thing. But I think at that point you're okay, if that makes sense.
Can I just quickly read this message from Zubair Munsif who on our Facebook page? Just to remind you again, we are live streaming, and you can check out Mobeen's trousers. They're very cool, by the way. Zubair, we need to get rid of this idea that our family's honour is placed between a woman's legs. Since when? Where is the guy's responsibility?
Mahak.
So I have a little bit of a different backstory. So I was born in India, and my mum is from a small town called Porbandar in Gujarat. So sometimes it kind of feels like she didn't have any of these conversations with her parents at all. And that's, kind of what it comes down to. Like, I've never had these open conversations with my parents because we just don't talk about that. And it feels like, we came to this country, we brought you here so you could study and be successful and, get married and that kind of stuff. So where does sex stem into it? Where does, have it like talking about homosexuality? It's not about that. It's about being successful. And that's what we talk about a lot, but we don't have these conversations amongst our families, which is probably why I guess you can call it a little bit, you can say that you're not as integrated with society because you're not having these conversations. So you're not opening yourself up to different perspectives, and you're not considering the views behind, like, why is it so bad to have sex before marriage? I'm neither for nor against. Just want to say that. Yeah.
We've got listening in from Bristol and Birmingham. We've got LGBT rights campaigner Kakhan Qureshi. Good to have you with us, Kakhan. What do you make of what you've heard so far? And also, 1 in 3 British Asians have a problem with same-sex relationships. What do you make of that?
Good evening. I'm really disappointed and quite sad to hear all what's being said tonight in this topic. I think a lot of the conversations that we're having is repetitive to what I've heard over the last 30 years, and it doesn't seem as if we've made any progress whatsoever. Hearing the topic about same-sex in particular and how people feel about that, I'm quite surprised that, I'm not quite surprised, I'm quite shocked that 34% are against same-sex relationships, because we do have same-sex legislation now here in the UK, and it doesn't seem to be transferring very well across to the South Asian community. So it's something that I'm trying to tackle with the articles that I write and my discussions that I have with people.
Can I ask you a question? You know, I think a lot of our lovely audience here have been talking about context. So a thing that's come up again and again is the idea that we are second or third generation immigrants. Perhaps there's a view of looking to a particular culture and to particular values because we are holding on to something. Do you want to see more people challenging that and saying, no, that's not good enough?
Yeah, definitely. Because, I mean, even when I was a young man myself in my teens, I used to say, why don't we talk about mental health, sexual health, women's issues? And that was going back about 30 years. And recently I organised a conference here in Birmingham for the South Asian LGBTI community, addressing those particular issues. And everyone thought it was a good step forward. And I admire and advocate and applaud anybody who is challenging the stereotypes and stigma associated with all the topics that we've discussed tonight, because to me, it's a way forward. And it's a shame if young people are being brought up on the same prejudices that I was brought up in.
Let me bring in, that's Karen Withers there, calling in from Birmingham. Let's go to Mehul Pasari, Assam Raised, who's listening in from Bristol, I believe. What would you like to say about what you're hearing so far, Mehul? And good evening.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to say that I am quite surprised and happy with all the points raised and sharing my own personal experience, as people have already said that you can't me personally, I can't speak to my parents about having relationships before a certain age, or sex. Talking about sex before that is a very big issue. Whenever I talk to them, or they come to know from other sources, they are this is not the right age for you. You should be focusing on your career, and so there's a lot of disappointment, and it's really difficult. I would say that's it.
I'm curious to know from you, and I'd love for our audience to get involved as well. When did you first hear about sex, and how did you learn about sex? If you don't mind me asking such a personal question, by the way.
I'm absolutely happy answering that question, because to be honest, when I came to Bristol for the first time, that was 2 years ago. So when my friends or my flatmates used to talk about sex or relationships or something like that, I used to be surprised and shocked as to I don't know what are they talking about. And if I asked them what's going on, they used to be Mehul, stop acting smart or something like that. But I'm being genuine, I don't know what you're talking about.
Mehul, how old are you, can I ask?
I'm 19 years old.
Okay, so this was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Okay, and would you say your experience, without putting you too much on the spot, have you expanded your horizons since then?
Yeah, definitely. After coming to UK, my horizons have
Mehul.
definitely expanded. And once I go back to, whenever I go back to India for holidays and stuff like that, and when I see people over there, or I have a girlfriend now, but when I it's really difficult for me, so I prefer staying over here than going over there.
Shabash, Mehul. Well, can we have a round of applause for Mehul?
Well, we know Super Joshi's a Kama Sutra expert here, don't we? Just be interested to know just from anyone else about sex. Got your hand
Completely.
up.
And then I think Chirag had his hand up, but go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, slightly off topic, but I just want to talk about why this is so problematic. And I can say this from stories I've heard and what I've seen from young people, is that if we're not creating these safe spaces to talk about sex and what it is, a lot of young men and a lot of young women are turning to porn to learn about sex. And there's a huge problem with doing that, because the porn industry is obviously selling sex in a certain way, conveying women's bodies in a certain way, conveying what sex should be like in a certain way. And that's really problematic. So I think that's why it's so important that we create these safe spaces. It may not be in our families, but maybe in these societies and these networks that we Asians have, we need to create these spaces to talk about sex with young people, so they do it safely and respectfully and all those kind of things as well. So yeah.
Absolutely. Can we go to Chirag? And I think porn is something we will be discussing on the show soon. Yes, Chirag.
Why would you say that when I was about to come on? That's so much pressure. The wrong kind of pressure. Yes. So my family never really, we talked about the sex. It was very much don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. And then I also grew up in a boarding school going up to my puberty year, a very Christian boarding school. So I was the opposite of screwed. I was learning nothing. So I had to basically learn from hearing it from the older boys, which means I had a very not really knowing kind of what if I were to do it in that regard. I had to basically, when I finally got to university, when I went to Brighton for a year, and I was like, oh, so this is the right way to talk about this kind of thing. This is the right way to approach that kind of thing. And then in university, but it's not something I spoke about with my, really ever spoke about with my parents. Like something my parents kind of like pretended, even if there's signs that it might be happening. It's like, nope, we don't see, we don't know, nothing's happened.
Babies just come naturally.
Yeah, it's true. The stork's on his way. My child's still 10 years old, except when we need him to carry stuff. Then, yeah, there's nothing going on there.
Let me bring in also politics student Isha Negi, who's listening in from Bristol. Good to have you with us as well. I won't ask you about your love life, don't worry, but just I think you can share it if you'd like to.
I might.
Yeah, but what do you make of what you're hearing so far?
I'm just, again, like, shocked, I guess, but not at the same time. Like, I'm not surprised to hear that people are still very reluctant to discuss these things. But I was just, I guess I was just hoping for more, like, just people being more open-minded, you know what I mean?
What about in your personal experience with your family, with siblings perhaps? Are you able to be open about these sorts of conversations?
No, like, it's not like I've never tried to be open about it either, because I know it's a no-go. Just from, like, the lack of speaking about it tells me that we don't talk about it.
So that means same-sex, anything to do with relationships?
Just anything, sex, relationships. The only time, like, my parents will talk about relationships is to joke about arranged marriages, and that's kind of it.
To joke? Ooh. I mean, what's your reaction to that?
I'll just laugh along with it, because I know, like, it's not something that they're serious about. Like, an arranged marriage isn't something that they'd ever consider for me, which is why I can laugh.
I want to read this Facebook message from Sheila Rani, who says, majority of British Asian parents know that their children are having sex before marriage, but decide not to believe it or even ask. You're all nodding. Yeah. Should we go to member of the audience?
Suraj.
Hi, my name's Suraj. I think just sat here thinking about it, I was thinking the way that we're all talking that we can't approach our parents to have that conversation. I think it comes from their own experiences. They probably didn't approach their own parents about the conversation, so how can they turn around and approach their kids comfortably on the same topic? I think we're all in that awkward bubble of who approaches it and when, and I think when we all hit that level of maturity, when we hit that age where we feel like we're more comfortable and it's something that you need to approach them about, that's when that occurs. And it sounds like for a lot of people that came about after uni, when their parents told them that this is a maturing phase, because now they're suddenly on their own, having to do their own experiences, they're going forward there. I think that's just something to look at in terms of trying to understand our parents and what it's like for them, looking back the other way rather than just one direction, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Suraj. Do you think any of us have a responsibility, though? Do you think we have a responsibility to actually, in many ways, we have resources to hand, we can lead the conversation. If you really wanted to, we could.
I think everyone has a responsibility at the end of the day. We are, like we say, we're a community, right? And it's not like we're a small community. There's a lot to filter down. I mean,
so we do, but then who here, I saw you put your hand down then, who here has led that conversation up? Maitri, your story was brilliant, but go on.
We're expecting another story. Come on.
So, obviously, so my mum's just as strict as every other Asian parent that there is out there. Education. But I just obviously started questioning about sex. And then I don't know why I did this. I just thought, like, I really want to change my mum's opinions about things. And I just don't think, I know that she's so much smarter and, like, I want to open her mind to, like, what I believe. So I just told her, like, one day, like, oh, mum, like, what would you do if I was gay? Like, would you still love me? And that was a really frank conversation. And she said, of course I would. Like, of course I love you. Obviously, that's a bit awkward for me. And, like, I don't know what to do and, like, all this sort of stuff. But I was just like, thank you. Like, I love you so much more for, like, saying that to me. But it was such a weird thing for me to, like, come out and say. And, like, it was a bit brave of me to say as well. And I always joke back at, like, oh, mum, by the way, I'm gay, by the way. And I just do that just to make sure that I'm having this conversation with her. And, like, I talked to her about a lot of stuff like that, like racism, sexual beliefs and sexuality. And I think that's my responsibility,
Could you do that could you talk about these things with your dad?
Oh no, but
It's a start.
I'll start with my mum and then I'll gradually like go over to him. But yeah, that's just another topic.
Sharon?
Yeah, I tried having this conversation with my mum, and I think the biggest thing I realised is it's uncomfortable for her, but it's because no one ever had that conversation with her. So I think my parents have never tried to have that conversation with me, but I think my mum wouldn't even know where to start. So most of what I have learnt about sex has come from my friends who at university who mostly went from an Asian background. And I think that's something, I grew up in a mostly Asian area and people didn't really talk about it, and there was a lot of judgment, like Taryn mentioned earlier, about people who were having sex. And I think now that I'm older and I run a South Asian community group myself, like these are the kinds of topics that within that space we're able to talk about, because people get the cultural background and it's a comfortable space in which you're all young South Asian women having the same kinds of issues and you can discuss them together.
Yeah.
And I think those are the kinds of spaces in which we're able to do that, and hopefully I'm sure a lot of people in this room are starting those conversations.
Just to remind, if you're just tuning in or listening in, you're listening to the BBC Asian Network with Mobeen and Nomia. We're in the live lounge with a live studio audience made up of Asian Network listeners and special guests. We're asking the big question, as British Asians, who do we think we are? Do get in touch. You can text 81869 or tweet at BBC Asian Network using the hashtag British Asian. And the question that you asked Mobeen at the start of this particular bit on social attitudes was, do you feel these conservative values are making young British Asians unhappy?
Yeah.
Is anyone unhappy? We're all happy.
Okay, none of you are
Also-
unhappy. But all right, answer this for me
wait.
then. Go on. I'll bring you in a second, but I just want you to have a think about this. Is anyone here come out to their family? Is anyone not straight? Okay, so the people you know in the Asian community that are not straight, are they happy? Let's just be honest about it. All right, you're all shaking your heads now. Go for it.
I actually, well, now going to this point, I actually have a friend who is gay. He doesn't talk about it with any of us. It's something that we found out through other platforms, through white friends that have been to university with him, and he's felt very open with them, but it's not something that he will talk to about with his family at all, or his friends, and he's from like a strict religious background, and it is really sad to see him, and I think it's pushing him back in all sorts of progression, not just happiness on like a relationship level, but in general life. Like it's just something that you can see it in him, that it's not something that he can progress with. And what I think is really sad is that it's like what Maitri was saying, that she asked her mum, would you love me? And her mum said, yeah, of course I would. But I think a big issue with Asian communities is it's a lot to do with what other people think, not just about what your parents think. So even if your parents would still love you and they wouldn't, throw you aside, it would really, really bother them what everyone else would think about them and the family as a whole.
So doesn't this bring us back to the issue of responsibility? Are we all because if you've got friends in that situation, it's not just about sexuality. There was I haven't got the stat to hand, but there was the stat about people disapproving of members of the Asian community being in a relationship with people of another ethnicity. All these issues. Is there not a conversation to be had whilst we are in a privileged position and our parents are not wagging a finger at us? Should we be having that conversation with them and calling them out?
And they were both gay. And I remember ringing home telling my mum I'm living with guys, and the first thing I made sure I got in was that they're gay, just so that she knows that they don't find me attractive. And then at the same time doing fashion, I'm a fashion designer, so basically being in the fashion background, I have found that a lot of my friends, male and female, are gay, and I have openly introduced them to my mum and said, yeah, they're gay. But I found that selected family members would find it hard, even that, I've got a family member that is, and open about their lifestyle. But people do tend to judge, or there's a group of people, like a section of the family that would accept and a section of the family that don't. I find that, and then also the marriage thing. like, are you going to get married? Some of my friends have actually considered going abroad, where I remember a couple of years ago I was having a conversation with one of them saying that you shouldn't be marrying someone if you know what your sexuality is. But again, it came down to what does the community think? I'm getting this age, should I get married?
So you had a gay friend that was going to marry a straight person,
thinking about
someone of the opposite
exploring
gender.
going to India and wanting to get married abroad. And I think that is quite scary, especially because I'm from Birmingham. And in Wolverhampton a couple of years ago, there was that Rani case where there was a chap that went to India and got married to a Punjabi girl, and then obviously, tragically ended where.
Yeah, we don't know the ins and outs of the case, but
the thing is, these kind of situations happen because the pressure put on them when they get to a certain age and they've got to get married and family.
I just want to bring Indy in briefly.
Just wanted to mention a story from a family member myself in terms of my cousin who was gay, and he came out after extreme pressure from the family to get him married. And having that conversation with him, realising that the huge issues he faced, and obviously he opened my eyes to some of the issues the wider South Asian community and the LGBT community are facing, especially sort of the whole piece around marriage of convenience, and there's whole industries there where people would actually find someone, a gay couple would find another sort of lesbian couple, and they would actually get married sort of between themselves, and so they'll have this fake life with in front of their family, and they even have these sort of it's like a contract. All of a sudden they'll say, okay, I'll go to 4 of your family functions, you go to 4 of my family functions, and it'll look as if we're together and we're straight. And I just thought, you're basing your whole life around a lie because of you feel that the community is going to persecute you for your sexual beliefs, which I think is outrageous, and the fact that it's gone to that depth in terms of people in our community. And I think we do have a responsibility and right to call it out for being very, very wrong.
And just to echo that comment by you, Indy, Anil Singh Palmer on our Facebook page has said, a lot of these stats doesn't surprise me. Ultimately, it's up to the current and the next generation to ensure that we are open with our children and have a different relationship with them than many of us did growing up.
Absolutely. I think we're coming up to the last half hour. We've got just enough time to squeeze in one more thing from the findings. If you listen to my show regularly, you'll know that I end each night with something that I call the happy ending. I do. And tonight we are having a happy ending of sorts because we're talking about optimism. So British Asians are more optimistic than the general population in terms of whether they see Britain as somewhere they can fulfill their aspirations and ambitions. So it was 72% of British Asians were optimistic compared to 64% of the rest of the population. But is it that simple? Take a listen to this.
I've come across that a lot of people say, oh, you Paki, you've probably done the 9/11 bombings, or your family from Al Qaeda, yeah? When's your brother gonna go join the Taliban?
You can't touch sensitive topics like that and portray an image that's not true.
If someone thought that that's how I lived, then I'd be offended.
It's got much better. I mean, I remember when many years ago when we were, it was the whole bud ding ding thing. It was related to the accent, really.
If there's this world perception that Muslims are so extreme in their views that they're prepared to go to such lengths, there's always this danger, because I'm brown, am I going to be seen as in that negative light as well?
Well, my friends are like, that's all we see on TV. Either you Asian people are shopkeepers or terrorists.
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's why you need to challenge it.
So we're here in the live lounge with our audience, and I want you to make a bit of noise and show me how happy and optimistic you are. Are we happy with that, Mobeen?
I mean, that was
terrible.
Wasn't the most optimistic. Come on, people.
Come on. No? Okay. It's like, woo. So let me just throw some stats at you. In terms of the Commerce poll, it found that 31% of British Asians say they've been treated worse by other people after terrorist attacks in Britain, particularly high figures for British Muslims. The levels of trust in the police slightly lower than for the general population. The Brexit headline, 24% of British Asians are optimistic about Brexit, 39% pessimistic. But it's interesting, just generally, British Asians are more optimistic. I want to know where that optimism comes from. I'm going to get you, Jaspri, to kick it off. Where do you think it comes from? And is the future bright?
I think the optimism is something that's somewhat ingrained in the immigrant community here. They have that mindset of this is a place of all that growth that they really aspire to and hope for and dream for. So I think that's kind of where it comes from. And I think that trickles down into the second and third generation somewhat, but I'm kind of thinking about the generation now, this kind of third generation. I'm thinking about the students that I teach and the Asian students that I teach. I think there's now a lack of aspirations and a lack of optimism from the young people that I see. Maybe it's because they've seen a lack of role models for them growing up. I can speak specifically from kind of the national curriculum. There's no one in there that they can see and relate to, especially in figures in history and that sort of thing. So I think in young people at the moment, it's really, I don't know, they're feeling quite lost, even though maybe the older generation are somewhat still optimistic.
Do get in touch if you're listening and you feel lost, like Jaspreet's saying. Can I come to you, Harris? Are you an optimistic guy?
Very, very optimistic. I think nowadays, just to touch on like the optimism, I think a lot of it is to do with how time has evolved. So there's this whole era of social media and like the fact that you can now actually pursue what you want to do without having that thought of, is this right or wrong? So I think social media plays such a key role in building a personality, and I think the optimism comes from knowing that you can achieve it now.
Social media can make you unhappy as well though, can't it?
It can, but I think there's balance. I think that's what's vital. I think having the balance between, what's enough and what's too much, I think we all can be on our phones all the time, and I think we can all overwork. But I think just to touch on the optimism, I think it is because in this day and age, like, we can be whoever we want to be. There is restrictions and there is a lot of things where people are going to frown upon, but I think just taking that leap forward and being able to actually see influential people doing things, like even having platforms like Asian Network and having these people on TV, acting, musicians, artists, like it's time to change, essentially. Like, I think the optimism comes from the fact that we can see the change. So it's exciting, if anything, and that's what makes me optimistic. I'm passionate about being able to do things, like, most definitely.
Thanks, Harris. I want to bring in Chirag in a second, but I want to ask, has anyone got an explanation for why, according to the poll, British Asians were a little bit more optimistic than the rest of the population? I think Chirag first, and then go for it.
Okay. Well, I believe that the reason why now that they might be more optimistic or optimistic is because ever since we came to the country after partition or later from East Africa, we've had a lot of success. I believe Parle mentioned that there was lots of money in our community, like more than average. Just
success, not money.
Okay, but there's success, but there's
success, not money. Yeah.
So yeah, there's lots of success in that community. So that is kind of encouraging, even though it's in certain areas, like there's more in business rather than like in the arts. But there's still some there. For example, I'm working with the British Pakistan Foundation, producing a series of videos, recipes for success, with people from the community showing how they got there, how they managed to make their impact, and also advice for more people in the community who want to get into those kind of positions. So as we've already had this kind of success, this stable footing, more people are aware that, oh yes, that person's brown like me, but they had success in that field. They became an actor or a news presenter, or became an academia. So that means I can do it as well. Once they're seeing it, they're more optimistic because they can see themselves.
So for you, it's about role models. Can we go to Indy first, because he was itching, and then Mehak?
In terms of my background is in economics and finance, and there's a lot of studies in America looking at millionaires and people with a lot of wealth, and the vast majority of millionaires in America are actually first-generation immigrants, and so you can use that as a comparable in the UK, which no doubt I'm sure that the demographics might be similar, and the fact that actually the second generation from those families who were millionaires were actually emotionally happier because usually their children, the parents would make sure their children were well looked after, and they would live their life vicariously through them because they would make those sacrifices. And I'm sure a lot of people in this room could probably had a similar sort of experience with their parents making a sacrifice, maybe working double shifts, maybe not having the nicest clothes and making sure that their children had everything. So I think that's one thing that affects our emotional happiness, because our parents really do provide for us and make sure that we're supported financially, and that gives us that sort of hope and optimism in that respect.
That's really fascinating. So for you, it'd be the idea that we came from a place where there was struggle, perhaps, and because we've achieved, that's been like the cherry on top of the cake for us.
Exactly. I've seen my family go from a working class background up to an upper middle class background throughout my lifetime, and I've seen that. I've seen my father and my mother struggle through 2 jobs each to get there. So, and I have the optimism. I'm thinking, well, if they can do it, and life's so much easier for me now. I've got a degree, I've got this, I've got that. I'm working in the city, whatever have you. Obviously, I'll be way more optimistic than they necessarily were in the past.
Thanks, Cindy. Mehak?
To answer your question about why British Asians might feel this way, I was reading a really interesting statistic from last year. It was the Cabinet Office statistics. It was like 1 in 3 Indians are in the top earning bracket or something. So that could probably be why. But once again, it's probably because there's so much inequality in India, and no matter what people say, sometimes your caste does matter and where you're from. Whereas here, when my parents migrated here, the reason they did it is because education would be a lot cheaper. So to go to university, you're there on merit, and there's no way that you can maybe pay extra to get in, stuff like that. And you can actually work hard, get a degree, which you can get a loan for, and then you can, become, I guess, whatever you want to be. But then again, I have to agree with Harris on that about the optimism. Because in my personal experience, I went to university to study history, and I went outside of London, and it was a really big deal. I remember my friend's mum, she was like, what are you going to do? And I was like, history. And she was just laughing for a minute because she thought I was joking, and it was my idea of a practical joke, because she was like, I don't understand what that means. What are you going to do with it?
It's not a medicine degree or a law degree.
Yeah.
We all know that stereotype, right?
Yeah, and it was just so it just didn't really make sense. It didn't fit into the stereotype, and I found it a really hard step. It sounds so silly now, but to just take the step towards studying history.
Can I throw some stats at you all? Is that okay? Just on the issue of optimism, it's interesting with Brexit. 24 optimistic about Brexit. Any of you optimistic about Brexit? It's a unanimous no here. Also, immigration was an interesting one, wasn't it? Because British Asians are less likely to say the level of immigration is too high, but 34, so 1 in 3 still do think it is. I'd love to know a little bit about that, because I find that really interesting about immigration.
I find it really uncomfortable. Can anyone
that's
explain
another
that
word.
for me? Sharon, you're nodding your head, and then we'll go to you. But Sharon, go for it.
Quite a few British Asians did vote for Brexit, and a big part of that actually was the immigrant sentiment. And I have found sometimes, my parents included, they can have quite anti-immigrant sentiment, and a lot of it actually stems from yes, they themselves were immigrants, but they kind of feel like we got here, we worked our asses off, and we're actually doing really well, and we're kind of blended or assimilated into this society. And when they see other immigrants who have moved over in more recent years, they have this thing of we struggled really hard and we're really settled in here, but they don't they similarly then, as an insider now, kind of judge those coming in.
Is it snobbiness? We're being snobby?
Yeah, I don't know if it's that, or it's just the difficulty of trying to assimilate in the first place. So now that they're there, they're okay, no, we're an insider, and everyone else is an outsider.
So they're pulling up the drawbridge, the same we've got in and you can't.
Yeah, kind of. And I think that is a big reason why a lot of kind of Asian communities voted for Brexit, because it's we're here, but we don't necessarily want to extend that bridge to further other immigrant communities. They don't feel that solidarity with immigrants from different backgrounds.
Can I bring in Nazir Mir, who's Professor of Race, Identity and Citizenship? Is Nazir with us? Yeah, you're in the back. What do you think about this? Because do you think there's a line here, immigration, and integration? Do you think British Asians, just picking up on the point made by Sharon, feel differently about level of immigration because of how we've integrated?
I'm not sure how much they do, actually. It's surprising in the data that came back from your survey that British Asians were generally more progressive about immigration than the white majority. And if we're talking about progressive attitudes, you need to include that into the mix and not just attitudes towards gender relations as well. I think that's quite important to tell that story. But it's a open question as to whether British Asians are more hostile to immigration or whether they're more hostile to the negativity around immigration, which inevitably is resurrected with things like the Brexit debate.
You mean that they're affected almost like the rest of the population about
More so.
about
I mean, there's a
immigration?
kind of a blowback, isn't there? It was striking that during and after the Brexit vote, the reported levels of discrimination for British Asians went up. And now that was an experience about a debate about immigration. So if British Asians see that debate panning out like that, then of course they're more anxious about immigration.
I see you've had your hand up for a while.
This is going back to the topic of optimism. So from the stories that I was hearing, it was more, the stories were rooted in economic and financial success. And I was sat there just thinking, as a Muslim man, how is this going to apply to me? Because what do I have to be optimistic about away from financial stuff? Because once I go to the airport, I'm still getting 4 S's on my boarding pass for a secondary screening. So it's cool, we can make money, we have corner shops and we have all these stereotypes and we root our money together so we can buy houses then and we share wealth within each other. But we've had that for years. So we're talking about, are we still backwards? We're optimistic about this one specific thing still, about being financially stable. When I go to the passport, I'm getting secondary screening. Like I went to New York, all of my cousins' bell rang and they got escorted out. I had been before, so I was luckily I was okay.
So you're not optimistic?
I'm not optimistic about the things that really matter. Financial success and things are like you said, and I respect it. Like your parents worked 2 jobs, both of them. So now you have it. So where are we going from there? Because a lot of us, and like most of these stories for me, like I come from a single parent household, so it's just my mum. So I'm Muslim, got single divorced mum. So from the financial side, it's cool. But where are we going from there?
Thanks so much for sharing. Thanks for sharing. I want to bring in Yusuf Qureshi, who is listening in Glasgow. And Yusuf, you work for the Prince's Trust, don't you, to support young British Asians? Tell me about your opinion on what you're hearing.
Yeah. So, Princess Trust, I work with the Mosaic program, which is something that is within the Princess Trust and is mainly aimed at helping BME and Muslim young people. Now, from what I'm hearing, I myself, I'm really massively optimistic about Great Britain, about the opportunities that we can get from there. And kind of embarrassingly, even on Pakistan Independence Day, is because about a month ago I was in Pakistan. And I always compared it to what my life would have been if I stayed in Pakistan. I got to speak to a lot of my cousins that were there right now, and maybe this is just in my own household, I'm not sure, but when it came to the males of my family, they would maybe go to university, maybe they wouldn't, and whatever they would do, they would always end up going and working in the family business, which for me was a factory. And for the females, I know one of my my girl cousins that I sat down with, by the age of 19 she was engaged, by 21 she was married, and by 23 she had about 2 children. And then her life from that point on was just to cook and clean for the family. And to me, I just saw a lot of wasted youth. I saw a lot of wasted talent. So I think Great Britain is an absolutely amazing country. I don't know if I identify myself as Scottish. And when it comes down to Brexit, I mean, we didn't really want Brexit, but what can you do?
It's really interesting. Just on the point of optimism and what you were saying, I see about being Muslim as well. Just to let you know, in the actual survey, it found that British Indians are more optimistic than British Muslims. And is that surprising?
No. I wouldn't find it surprising. As previous guests have said on the show, we brought a lot of that optimism here to the country. I mean, my grandfather was from Amritsar in India, and he treated Britain like it was his home. And it was a small act of kindness when he first came to the country. It was a bus driver that had went off his route just to take him home, and it was from that. But no, I don't find that surprising at all. What the survey says.
Do get in touch if you're listening to the show. We're bringing you a special show this evening on the BBC Asia Network from the Live Lounge. Mobeen and Nomia, we're asking British Asians, who do we think we are? Do we all know who we are? Have we decided yet?
I think I know who I am. I want to bring in Super Joshi. I want to hear from you as well. There's a couple of people at the back who haven't spoken yet, so you've got about 5 minutes. So think of something profound to give us, Super Joshi.
I want to bring it back to what we talked about at the beginning, about dumbing down our dissiness, because that for me is part of the optimism. Ironically, I've dumbed down my dissiness also when I worked in a majority Asian environment, just because I found myself to be the advocate more for the European or the British way of doing things, especially if they're like maybe 80% Indians or Pakistanis and maybe a couple, like 20% white people. I found myself doing that. On the flip side, I think really for me, dumbing down my dissiness was not trying to deny who I was, but was always about connecting with who I was with on a point that, hey, look, I am brown with a beard, but actually I'm a human as well. And it was about finding the common ground. And I think actually the thing that makes me optimistic now is that we are moving beyond religion a lot of the times, where we can have conversations with people of different backgrounds and actually realise we all need a place to live, mortgages are high, there's
got shared values,
NHS waiting lists are long,
concerns.
All of that kind of stuff. And I think we can also own our dissiness a bit. I mean, when I used to visit clients in Europe in a previous career, I used to take them barfi. And for them, that was amazing. And actually, and I started introducing it into the office where I was as well. And I was the only brown guy because I made the mistake, shall we say, of studying a language at university and not a science. And so I was a little bit different. And if you show you are the same enough, but also you have something a little bit different, people take to that. And I think we can all get along.
Just briefly, because we're running out of time, if we could bring in Suraj and then Harris.
I think going with optimism in this country, I think the main thing is that we can make a change more so in the last, I'd say, 10, 15 years. I think social media is such a massive platform where you can kind of express yourself and reach such a wide audience. I mean, as a kid growing up, the only Asian radio station that I knew of was Club Asia. I don't know if everyone remembers that back in the day. Nope. But now BBC Asian Network has such a wide reach that you can talk about so many different topics, so many different people. I forgot the rest of what I was going to say, but to me, I think it's just the fact that it's a positive country. We can make a change and do things about it. I think women especially, I mean, my mum was at home, or like through me growing up, wouldn't say she was a housewife, she was a home management because she's running the household. There's more to just cooking and cleaning at home. There's bills to pay, there's everything to run, there's kids to organise. So I think from that, my dad was the only one bringing in kind of the wealth, so to speak. But the fact that now women can work and they can be the main breadwinner, I think there's a problem with that. I mean, you achieve what you need to achieve, and if you have the talent, go and explore it, go and find it. I think optimism comes from that, the fact that you're actually doing something within the life and that you can go and explore that, and there's the option for that in today's day and age, in this era right now. So
do you feel ownership? Do you feel entirely at home? Do you feel this is yours?
I suppose that comes down to circumstance and what kind of situation you're in. I mean, some things would be like,
but for you personally,
I think more so now. Growing up, I was predominantly in a more kind of white area. I was the only Hindu Punjabi at school, and my sister. I could only speak Punjabi until the age of 5, so anyone speak to me, I couldn't say a word. But then growing up, I got to adapt. People were more open. I'd eat Indian food, and people were like, oh, what's that smell? Now it's like, oh my God, you can cook Indian food. That's amazing. Like, teach me. It's just like, okay, it's just a change that you see from just 10 years. I was 5 years old when all this was existing to 10, and suddenly when I hit 15 to 22 now, it's a big change to suddenly be like, okay, people are more open. I can talk about this. I can be myself more, and you learn more about yourself. You can explore yourself more. So I think growing up in that kind of space, that's where optimism comes from. The fact that now you're more comfortable in your surroundings, as opposed to feeling like, oh, I don't know who I am. Where do I fit in? Where do I belong? There is a sense of belonging now.
Thanks, Suraj. Can we bring in Harris?
Just to finally touch on like optimism, I mean, like at the age of 16, I was kicked out of school. So I was kicked out of education completely. I thought, that was it for me. I'm never going to be able to continue, and, I'm not going to be able to do anything. Like, what am I going to do? What are my family going to say? How do I break it to them? And, I never personally thrived in the education system, but after I got kicked out, I learned to appreciate that was what, brought my optimism to get the opportunity to be back in college and, get on these courses. And now I'm in my second year at university, and I'm optimistic because I never thought that I would initially get to that point. So, I think it stems down to just having these opportunities and being able to move forward.
And you're a
grow.
blogger star now, aren't you?
Yeah, well, trying.
Check him out. That's all we've got time. We've got to wrap up, don't we? That flew.
It went like that, didn't it?
You can continue the conversation online on the Asian Network Facebook page, and of course on Twitter at BBC Asian Network.
I need to thank Generation Smackdown. A lot of those clips you heard are available now on the BBC Three website. So thank you guys for giving us your audio. Thanks to all you guys. Thank you to everyone that texted in or got involved or tweeted. It's been fun. I hope it's expanded our minds. I really think it has. So thank you all for your time, and I appreciate the honesty. And you can tune in to me every night from 10 till midnight, Monday to Thursday. On the BBC Asian Network. I've just been told we've got a minute, so I'm going to do some stand-up. No, so I'm not going to do some stand-up.
Singing.
Really.
We are in the live lounge.
Yeah, so I just want to know if someone could give me very briefly reasons to be optimistic.
Make them one-word answers.
One-word answers. Let's go around the room.
Yeah, one-word answers, quick.
The next generation can do better, and they will do better.
And we've already done so much so far as well, so it's exciting to see what we do next.
There's so much diversity in this country, and I think we're learning every day to kind of appreciate one another more and more.
I think it's a responsibility that we have if we want to drive change, to be optimistic towards that, for sure.
I think we're our own people, so we should just own it.
I think everything is ever evolving, so just keep growing and moving forward.
Oh, I feel inspired. Do you, Mobeen?
It's nice. It's beautiful.
I think we are 50-50, right? We're a hybrid of just different cultures and everything, so we can just embrace the best of all the worlds and just, that makes sense.
I think as British Asians, we're at that frontier where we can break down a lot of these social barriers, and that responsibility is on us, and we will dictate our futures and how we do that. So it's a huge opportunity for us.
I think it's time we realise we're powerful beyond measure, and that's through our intelligence, through the things we know, things we do, our creative scenes, and now using that to the best of our ability.
Last one.
Quick.
Except that we are big city Pindus, we're villagers and from...
Perfect. Give yourself a round of applause. Goodbye, people. Thank you so much.
This is the British Asian Sound.